Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 295. Shi Sheng Peak, martyrdom is hard. What lay before their eyes was a bridge. The bridge was built from the edge of the cliff and stretched all the way to the end of the sky. In the far distance, there was a floating stone gate, and it was impossible to estimate its size with the naked eye. It stood tall amidst the clouds. Thunder and lightning mixed with torrential rain could not extinguish the scarlet flames emanating from its surroundings. Shizun, do you still remember? In the past, you told us that a long time ago, after Goshen Shanggong went to help the heavenly Emperor Fuxi fight off the Demon Lord, they drove the demons out of the human world and hoped that they would stop encroaching into the mortal realm after that. Taxian Jun placed his hands behind his back and looked towards the grand and majestic stone door and continued, the Demon Lord was defeated and he fled with his armor. After returning to the demon realm, because of his defeat, he felt even more ashamed. Therefore, he ordered all the doors that are linked to the mortal world to be sealed, and since then he had refused to do anything with the secular world anymore. He paused for a moment and continued, but there is no absolute in everything. Just in case, the Demon Lord has left a single opening. This is the one in front of us. Bang! A thunderous sound was heard. The door of martyrdom. However, Chu Wanning's gaze was not on the door of martyrdom. Ever since he came here, he had been staring at the bridge that connected the demon realm and the mountain behind the Shi Sheng Peak. When he saw that bridge, he was first shocked, then his face turned deathly pale. In the end, his entire body seemed to have been shattered, almost like a crazed demon. He turned his head abruptly. Mo Weiyu, are you mad? This bridge is so spectacular. Even though he had seen Chu Wanning's reaction, Taxian Jun still smiled, raised his eyelids and asked, what's wrong with you? Don't you like it? Like it? In front of him was a 5-foot wide bridge without half a log and half a nail. From the beginning to the end, it was formed from layer upon layer of overlapping human bodies. The corpses were piled on top of each other, suspended high in the sky, forming a bridge of corpses which end could not be seen. The corpses were of both men and women, young and old. They were densely packed like ants, and they directly led to the grand gate to the demon realm. How many were there? It was simply impossible to count. Since there is a door of martyrdom, there must be a path of martyrdom. Taxian Jun's expression was indifferent. It was as if these corpses were no different from the stones he picked up on the roadside. The wooden stakes he felled from the forest were no different from what he'd felled from before. Then he blew his whistle and a bright blue light flashed in the distance, as if something were running toward them from the far end of the bridge. Actually, there are some secrets about the demon realm that Shizun isn't clear about. Then, he turned around and smiled, if you don't mind, this disciple will talk to Shizun for a bit. Chu Wanning. Shizun only knew that during the great battle between Fuxi and the Demon Lord, Fuxi lured Goshen Shanggong to the heavenly palace to create the first sword in the world for Fuxi. However, he did not know that the Demon Lord had been harboring hatred in his heart for this and had deliberately wanted to take revenge on Goshen Shanggong. Although he could not do anything to the god of 1,000 weapons, he could punish the people of Goshen Shanggong's tribe. The Demon Lord then expel all of his mother's race from the demon realm. Taxian Jun held his sleeve as he stared at the faint blue light in the distance and spoke in a low voice. Demons have tyrannical spiritual energy since ancient times. It is because of this powerful bloodline that their physical energy consumption is enormous. Only by continuously eating the flesh of grain and fish that grew in the demon world can they maintain a normal flow of their spirit cores. After the race of Goshen Shanggong's mother had been vanished to the mortal world, due to the lack of suitable food for a long time, their spiritual cores gradually shrank and changed. In the end, most of them became useless trash. The only demon characteristics they retain are their bodies that are suitable for cultivation and breeding. Taxian Jun paused for a moment, then turned to look at Chu Wanning. Shizun should know the original race of Goshen Shanggong's mother, right? Even if he did not want to answer, it was a matter of great importance. After a moment of silence, Chu Wanning gritted his teeth and said, "The butterfly-boned beauty feast." "That's right." Taxian Jun clapped his hands and laughed. "It's the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan." The butterfly-boned beauty feast are also an extremely strong demon race. In order to pass on its heritage, it has taken a very long time for it to transform into a cultivation cauldron, giving birth to its physique. A body that was originally suitable for dual cultivation with a powerful spiritual core could allow their children to continue to grow stronger with each passing generation. But the door to the demon realm was closed to them and they can no longer get any more spiritual energy, so their strong spiritual cores are no longer there. All that is left is their spiritual bodies. Of course, he seemed to have thought of someone and his black eyes dimmed for a moment. There's also the extraordinary looks that the demons are born with. He did not need to explain, as Chu Wanning was very clear about this. In the world of cultivation, there were only two ways to think about the butterfly-boned beauty feast: eating their flesh and using them for dual cultivation. Previously, during the Xianyuan Pavilion auction, Song Kaiyutong had been used as such item for auction, but wasn't that why she was being auctioned for? Even someone as reasonable as Zhang Shi wouldn't treat the butterfly-boned beauty feast as a living person, what more those cultivators with inferior characters? A beautiful face and an alluring body. If they were used by a powerful expert, that would only add to their power. As he spoke, he cast a glance at Chu Wanning. After a while, he continued, "But if these two things appear on the weak, it will be the feather in the snow, the white fox in the dark. It's bound to be violated and massacred." The line of blue light in the distance was still slowly approaching, coming closer and closer. Taxian Jun continued, "At first, the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan still retained the demon race's strength and was able to interact with mortals. But slowly, it became weaker and weaker until it was almost completely annihilated. As you and I have seen, in the early days of the primordial era, the strong ate the weak. As for the rest, in order to protect themselves, they have no choice but to conceal their identities. How can they hide this? Well, this is the first time you've asked me anything since our reunion." Taxian Jun rolled his eyes and said flatly, "Actually, it's very simple. You should remember that when Song Kaiyutong cried, her tears were golden. This is a characteristic of the demon race. If they want to conceal their identity, they should not shed tears." Chu Wanning did not utter a word. To not shed tears is something that is easy to say but not so easy to do. The butterfly-boned beauty feast looks were naturally stunning, beauties that would stand in the crowd. Should they arouse suspicion, the cultivators would have ways to force them to shed tears. Those butterfly-boned beauty feast who were not discovered survived. Some lived in seclusion in the mountains while others chose to marry ordinary people. Those who were married to mortals had given birth to children that were sometimes demon-blooded and sometimes ordinary mortal. If one has strong demon blood surging in their body, it would be difficult for the child to control themselves. Tears of grievance would fall from their eyes, and if others saw that they were golden, then the adults and children would all face disaster. If they're ordinary children, then it's still not something to be happy about, since the demon blood would still exist in their bodies, and who knows which generation will produce a butterfly-boned beauty feast. Hearing his words, Chu Wanning suddenly thought of a person and said two words with a slight crease of his brows. Song Xin Ye. Oh, the one called Song Xin Ye, the Lord of Huobi from a few hundred years ago. Taxian Jun nodded. That's right, during the process of reproducing, there will occasionally be extremely lucky children. They are just like ordinary people. When they cry, they don't shed golden tears, and their bodies won't have any obvious characteristics suitable for dual cultivation. In fact, because their bloodlines are so well mixed, they can quickly produce a spiritual core, and their spiritual energy is tyrannical and does not lose to any pure demons. However, the possibility of that happening is extremely small. After a few thousand years have passed, those who have reached the Grandmaster stage can clearly be counted on one hand. As he spoke, he stretched out his 5 slender fingers and waved them in front of his eyes in a somewhat mocking and seemingly interesting manner. After a while, he continued, therefore, in such a precarious situation, many of the butterfly-boned beauty feast want to return to the demon realm. As long as they returned, they would no longer have to live a life where they were on tenterhooks and could not shed tears. They would no longer have to worry about someone selling them as cauldrons or dismantling their bodies into soups. In those years of war and chaos, in which people frantically searched for butterfly-boned beauty feast to earn a living, they did not need to mar or cut their own face. After speaking slowly for so long, he could finally make out a faint blue light in the distance. It seemed that 5 horses were galloping towards him from the path of martyrdom. Taxian Jun said, however, it won't be that easy to return to the demon realm. The demon lord had a blood feud with Gushan Shanggong. In his eyes, Gushan Shanggong was a traitor who sided with the heavenly realm. Therefore, it would be impossible for them to rise up from the roots of the 9 clans for generations to come. And of course the demon lord doesn't want the fallen butterfly-boned beauty feast clan to return to their homeland. The rain was still pouring down fast, the world was still wet. Taxian Jun watched as the carriage drew near. Only after a long time did he continue, it was only when the former demon lord was annihilated and the next demon lord ascended the throne, that this stance against the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan relaxed slightly. Chu Wanning's eyes shifted slightly. He would allow the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan to return to the demon realm. Permission was granted. Taxian Jun smiled, but, as Shizun saw, he set up a natural obstacle that can't be overcome unless someone uses forbidden techniques. If the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan want to go home, they have to do it. Chu Wanning's heart tightened. He finally understood the whole story. Taxian Jun pointed at the bridge of the Dead Sea in front of him and said, "Look at the path of martyrdom in front of you. It is the only bridge that connects the entrance to the demon realm with the human world. This bridge must be voluntarily sacrificed with living people in order to be slowly built downwards." He chuckled. It's already lucky to find one person who is willing to sacrifice his own life to pave the way for someone else. Luckier if you find 5, but it's really hell to find 100. If you are alive and well, who will willingly die for the sake of the descendants of a demon race? Chu Wanning looked up. So, they have to use Zhenlong chess formation. Taxian Jun did not expect him to reply. He was stunned for a moment before baring his teeth. Correct. He turned his head and looked at the magnificent path of martyrdom, his pupils gradually narrowing. These people are people who, over the years, I have refined as Zhenlong chess pieces to confuse their mind, making them willingly sacrifice themselves. How many people did you kill? Taxian Jun rolled his eyes. His black purplish pupils stared at Chu Wanning for a long time before he spat out the words, all of them. Well, almost. The bridge before his eyes seemed endless and without boundaries. It was as if everything was very quiet in the torrential rain, but also as if there were wraiths screaming and howling everywhere. They were hoarsely roaring and begging for mercy. Chu Wanning shuddered. Do you know how long this bridge is? Before Chu Wanning could reply, Taxian Jun said calmly, I've almost killed everyone in this mortal world. I'm afraid not even 10,000 are left alive. However, this bridge has only been more than half filled. The rest, even if we kill the last 10,000 people, will not be enough. So, you needed to open the gate of time and space, life and death. You can always think of the worst answer at once. That's right. I need to open the gate of time and space, life and death and acquire enough Zhenlong chess pieces from another mortal world before I can finish paving this path. The torrential downpour did not affect their surroundings at all. They looked at each other, brown eyes staring at cloudy dark purplish ones. Finally, they were met with a furious scolding from Chu Wanning. You're crazy. Within the purple lightning, Taxian Jun only formed a sneer. I knew you would react like that. As he spoke, he turned his gaze away. The carriages were approaching and he could gradually make out the details of their appearance. Gate of time and space, life and death, Zhenlong chess formation. He paused. It's best to have a rebirth technique when one attempts all of these. The gate to the demon realm would open again and they can all return to their homeland. Chu Wanning trembled. His anger and fear rendered him speechless. You must want to ask why the demon lord allowed them to go home if they perform these forbidden techniques, right? Taxian Jun looked at the approaching horse carriage with a rare look of understanding. It's actually very simple. The 3 forbidden techniques were created by Gushan Shanggong, representing the ability of the demon race to travel through heaven and earth. However, in the end, they were viewed as the source of disaster and against the heavens. He paused for a moment before continuing. The Butterfly-Boned Beauty Feast clan were implicated because of Gushan Shanggong, so it is only natural that they demonstrate their irreconcilable determination to sever all ties with Gushan Shanggong. They have to stand opposite of Gushan Shanggong and violate Fuxi's heavenly might in order to obtain the demon realm's forgiveness. Suddenly, with a long hiss, the 5 heavenly horses broke through from the flames of the path of martyrdom, facing the bleak wind and rain of the mortal world, standing upright in front of the bridge. Taxian Jun's black robe fluttered in the wind. He stepped forward and stroked a heavenly horse that had the skull of a skeleton, then said to Chu Wanning, breaking the restriction of performing the forbidden techniques disobeys the order of Gushan Shanggong and declaring enmity with Fuxi. As expected of the descendant of the demon race. All of Hua Binan's plans are for the Butterfly-Boned Beauty Feast clan. Shizun, do you understand now? End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 296. Shi Shengpeak. Just like the time in his dream. Understand. What was there to not understand? Shi Mingjing had concealed his true identity from the very beginning. For so many years, he had always avoided talking about his own parents. Even though he mentioned it occasionally, it would be with mournful looks in his eyes, making it hard for people to continue questioning him. There were loopholes in lies and words tended to lead to mistakes. There was no way Shi Mei wouldn't understand such simple logic. Thinking about it now, no matter how wronged or wounded Shi Mei had been since he was young, he had never shed a single tear. Come up, I will bring you to the end of the path of martyrdom. The carriage was made of gold and was embedded with statues of demons. 2 statues were carved on the shaft of the carriage and on the left was a bearded man. His eyes were wide open, and he held an imposing aura in his hands. The one who carved them must have some grievances because the figure of the man was extremely ugly and tiresome to look at. On the right was a plump woman with low eyebrows and closed eyes. Also, ugly but within tolerable limits. The most uncomfortable thing was that in front of the 5 horses pulling the carriage, there were 5 things floating around with their spiritual energy. These things were fake, they were carved out of wood, but Chu Wanning had seen them before at the bottom of the Jinchinj lake so he could easily recognize them. All the carriages and horses in the demon realm are the same. Taxian Jun glanced at the tiny head. It's been like this for thousands of years. Inside the carriage, Taxian Jun sat comfortably on the little bell on the demon horse's bridle. You should have guessed who those 2 little figures on the shaft are, he said. It's Fuxi and Nuwa. That's right. He smiled. The demon lord hates the heavenly realm so much that he would like to see the gods help pulling the carriages for the rest of his life. How was Sheneng spared? I've never heard of this from Hua Binan. However, according to the legends, Sheneng was a gentle and magnanimous man, and he normally didn't care too much about fightings and killings. He didn't have a very close relationship with Fuxi or Nuwa either. I imagine that in the past, that old schemer didn't participate in the battle between the demon realm and heavenly realm very much. Chu Wanning did not say anything else and turned to look at the red path of martyrdom outside the window. The demonic horse was extremely fast and after the time it took to make a cup of tea, it had already brought them to the end of this long, bloody bridge. After he got off the carriage, he saw the edge of the bridge made of bones. In front of him was a boundless sea of clouds, and the gate to the demon realm was several hundred times larger than it had been when he was at Shizun Peak. It was so huge that it seemed to connect the heavens and the earth above as it descended upon the earth, splashing the demon realm in the rain and the night. When a mortal stands before it, it is like a mayfly to a giant tree or a millet to the sea. Chu Wanning looked at the colossal door that led to heaven and saw exquisite relief carvings of the 5 realms. The demon realm was the strongest, followed by hell, ghosts, and humans, and the divine realm was the lowest. These relief sculptures were impressive, but they faintly revealed an unfathomable weirdness. Do you think it's strange? Taxian Jun walked to his side and stood alongside him as he looked at the giant door. When I first saw it, I felt that something was wrong. It took me less than an hour to figure out the problem. However, he did not intend to waste any more time to make Chu Wanning stare at the door for an hour, so he said, the carvings on the door were not made of the same material, but were forged later. It's the immortal's bone. Chu Wanning suddenly turned around. In the prehistoric era, when the gods and demon fought, the demon lord killed and skinned all the captives and immortals, turning them into floating sculptures, and embedded them into the doors to the demon realm. The strong wind made his clothes flutter. From today onwards, all living beings heading towards the demon realm will see just how many gods and demons have been captured by the Demon King. It also means that the demons behind the gates will never interact with the gods. After looking at the strange phenomenon for a while, Taxian Jun said, it's about time. Now that you know what we're going to do you still have so many complaints? To kill all those who went through 2 lifetimes, just to pave their way back home. Chu Wanning looked up. Even though he knew that Taxian Jun was just a puppet, he still could not help but say coldly, without any complaints, do you want me to say that you've done well? Taxian Jun was about to reply when he suddenly heard a commotion behind him. They turned around and saw Mu Yanli leading thousands of people from the back of the mountain. She did not expect the 2 of them to be here. She was stunned for a moment before her gaze landed on Chu Wanning. Why did you bring him here? He stared at Chu Wanning, but her words were directed at Taxian Jun. Aren't you afraid of him causing trouble? Taxian Jun said coldly, with just a glance, I know what he will do next. No need for you to worry. This place is an important place for the Butterfly Bone Beauty Feast clan to return to. Did you know? He didn't want to hear her waste any more words, so he interrupted her and said, then amongst you trash, who can fight him to a draw? Mu Yanli choked. By my side, it was even more impossible for him to do anything rather than if he were in a cage with 10 layers of forbidden spells. This venerable one was kind enough to share our worries with you. Why are you blabbering so much nonsense? You dash. Why? If you are not convinced, I will immediately send him back. From now on, I will not bother to do anything about it. Try to keep an eye on him yourself. Don't let him get close to this again by accident and easily take his life. Mu Yanli was left speechless for a while. After a long time, she changed the subject and angrily said, forget it. I've got some Zhenlong chess pieces. Fill them in. In addition, Anan has detained some people from this world and they are at Shisheng Peak. After you've tidied up the matter in front of you, quickly go back and create some new Zhenlong chess pieces. After he finished speaking, she flicked her sleeves and left. Taxian Jun glanced at Chu Wanning, revealing his white teeth as the dimples on his deepened. You're lucky that we have a batch of materials. Would you like to see how I made the bridge? The scene of a living person being offered as a sacrifice to build a pontoon bridge was too horrifying. That day, after he returned, Chu Wanning had a nightmare. In the dream, Taxian Jun stood at the end of the path of martyrdom, stepping on broken bones. His heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and every piece of minced meat had grown a bright red mouth. I don't want to die. Give me back my life, give me back my life. He saw half of Xue Meng's face among the corpses. He saw Xue Zhenjiang's eyes, Madame Wang's body and the hand with the thin mole on it. He ran towards them with all his might, shouting, "Xue Meng! Sect leader! F." His voice was cut off. He saw that under the blood-red light, Mo Ran slowly turned his head and saw that he was still the same disciple uniform from before. His eyes were gentle and sad as he said, "Shizun, save me. I don't want to die. I don't want to die like this. Save me." Suddenly, he woke up from his stupor as he gasped for breath. His face and back were covered in cold sweat. He wanted to stand up, but his wrist had been bound by Taxian Jun's forbidden spell, making him unable to move. It was quiet in the room, and he was the only one there. The sand in the hourglass was dripping slowly, like the tears of the dead converging into a river. Someone. In recent days, he had become slender and thin. He was sitting on the bed now, too thin, and the thick covers were almost completely over him. Memories from his other life, memories he had missed in this life, piles of corpses and a hopeless future. One by one, the pieces fell on his shoulders and grinded the bones to ashes. Chu Wanning's eyes were empty. He slowly recovered from the nightmare, but reality was no better than the nightmare. His expression was broken. Someone. Lu Gonggong hobbled in. He looked much older than Chu Wanning remembered. After all, this world was too far away from the world he lived in when he died in his previous life. "Grandmaster, are you having a nightmare?" The old servant could see through him at a glance. Chu Wanning nodded tiredly. "I'll go heat up a pot of ginger tea for you." "No need." Chu Wanning raised his moist eyes and looked at him through the darkness. "Where is Mo Ran?" "Still on the path of martyrdom." "How many people did he kill?" Elder Lugong was silent for a long time before sighing, "Grandmaster, there's no need to ask." The drip flowed on for a long, long time. The rain and wind outside was very bleak. This old servant does not know how to cultivate. However, he also knew that the day that the door of Shi Sheng Peak was opened was the day that nothing could be turned back. Actually, all of these, the Grandmaster understand as well. After a while, he suddenly closed his eyes and gripped the red magical chain on his wrist. Ever since his attempt to assassinate him, he had been on guard against him. When he had nothing to do, Taxian Jun would personally watch over him. When he went out to pave the way for the return of the demon race, Chu Wanning would be locked in the Wushan Palace. "Grandmaster, forget it. It's been 2 lifetimes, you've done enough." Elder Lugong's voice was old, like an autumn leaf about to fall. "The last few days, let's look at it like everyone else. It's all over. There's nothing else we can do. Have a good life. Stop torturing yourself." Elder Lugong then brought a bowl of ginger tea and watched Chu Wanning drank it. The old man used to be very cautious, knowing what to say and what not to say. This was also the reason why he was able to stay by Taxian Jun's side for so long. But on this rainy night, he looked at the extremely haggard Chu Wanning, whose face was even whiter than a porcelain cup. He looked at the rainy night outside and suddenly had a complicated feeling. Lugong didn't know how to console him, so he could only stutter, "Drink some more, at least to finish this bowl." It is said that nightmares are caused by the cold of the body. After drinking it, you won't have nightmares anymore. After a while, he mumbled in a daze, "My son used to have nightmares. After giving him this drink, he'll sleep soundly." However, the mumble was too soft that Chu Wanning did not hear it. When the old servant had served him tea, he went out slowly with a tray and wiped his eyes before he went out of the room. The old man's heart softened, but he could not do anything. Thus, his back became even more hunched. He disappeared down the corridor. Actually, Elder Lugong was right. To stop Shi Mei, the best time was before the gate of time and space, life and death was opened. If he missed it, then it would be almost impossible to reverse the situation. Chu Wanning sat in the empty Wushan palace. He knew that he lost to Shi Mei in the end. In his previous life, he discovered the truth too late, and his sacrifice and scheming only delayed this calamity for about 10 years. In the end, everything returned to its original point. He did his best, but in the end, nothing came of it. There was more than one scripture that said that when time and space had ruptured, heaven's punishment would arrive. Fact is, even if it did arrive, these two worlds were already in complete chaos. This was the last period of time. Many people knew this in their hearts, but the divine intent of Taxian Jun was incomplete, so he didn't feel anxious at all. He was living a very carefree life. When he returned that day, he brought a pot of pear blossom white wine. He poured himself a cup of wine as he said to Chu Wanning, "The path of martyrdom is more or less paved. Once I've done this for him, I'll be free." He took a sip of the pear blossom white that he hadn't tasted for a long time, then smiled. Oh, it tasted the same. After finishing his sentence, he looked up at Chu Wanning. "When they return to the demon realm, do you want to stay with me in this mortal world, or do you want to cross the gate of time and space, life and death, to let me follow you back to your previous world?" Chu Wanning looked at him and asked, "What about Shi Mei?" "She?" He was stunned for a moment, then his black brows slowly furrowed. His expression was somewhat blank and somewhat painful. He put down his wine cup and raised his hand to rub his forehead. Chu Wanning watched his every move as he thought to himself, Hua Binan has indeed confused his thoughts. To Taxian Jun, the matter of Shi Mei doesn't make sense anymore, so there was no need for him to ponder over it further. In the end, Taxian Jun felt a splitting headache. He suddenly slammed his cup down, and under the candlelight, he stared at the man in front of him with his sleepy and slightly red eyes. "I don't know." He opened his eyes and pulled Chu Wanning over. He was still sitting at his original spot. After a while, his forehead was pressed against Chu Wanning's waist. He was sniffling the fragrance of haetang blossoms. "Don't ask me any more." In the following days, Taxian Jun's manner were almost exactly the same as in his previous life. It even became more severe. This body that should not have feelings seemed to be afraid that Chu Wanning would disappear or die again, so he used his strongest technique to trap him. During the day, Taxian Jun would forge Zhenlong chess pieces and lay down the path of martyrdom. When he returned at night, he would be entangled with Chu Fei endlessly. It was as if only the most intense sexual intercourse could quell the uneasiness in his heart, as if only going deep into the warmth of Chu Wanning's body could he confirm that this was not a dream. Wanning. In the dead of night, the man sleeping beside him muttered, "Please pay attention to me." Even though he knew it was impossible, at this moment, he still felt that the person he was entangled with had a soul. The heartbeat under his chest was heavy and powerful, his face the same as the dead youth. When he spoke in a hoarse voice, there was even something similar to love in his voice. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 297. Shi Shengpeak. From the Butterfly-Boned Beauty Feast. On the sixth day, the door creaked open. The rain outside was still pouring down. Someone had put away a wet oiled paper umbrella, and was walking into the hall with a lift of his rain-soaked clothes. Shizun. The person was dressed in a morning white robe with a headband. His eyes were filled with emotion, but there was a tinge of green in his eyes. This was the first time since the battle at Sky-Reaching Pagoda that Shi Mei went to the Wushan Palace to look for him. Before, I wanted to visit Shizun, but I couldn't do so. Only today did I finally have some free time. If you come too late, don't blame me, Shizun. Chu Wanning only glanced at him once before turning his gaze away. Shi Mei didn't mind this at all. He sat down in front of Chu Wanning. Perhaps it was because everything was going smoothly that he seemed to be in a good mood, and his eyes were shining brightly. "Are you still angry? The gate to the demon realm is about to open. Does Shizun have nothing else to ask me?" Chu Wanning still did not answer. He looked out the window at the rain. His weakness and blankness were only shown in front of someone he deeply loved. Shi Mingjing had used up all of his heat, so he became a rock that no amount of persistence could melt away. Shi Mei sighed, I came here to have a heart-to-heart talk with you, so at least tell me something. Chu Wanning finally threw words at him, get lost. Unlike before the great battle, the closer one got to success, the calmer one's attitude became. He was not angered by Chu Wanning's coldness. Instead, he smiled and said, you're right. The rain was drumming on the damp windows, the gate of time and space, life and death had messed up the two worlds, any abnormality becomes normal. Chu Wanning even felt that the storm would not stop forever, that it would just continue to fall like this, submerging the two worlds. Shi Mei didn't mind. He got up and poured 2 cups of tea. He then handed one to Chu Wanning and said, since you want to ignore me, I'll just tell you some things myself. I don't like to explain myself, but I don't want to have too many misunderstandings with Shizun either. While the tea was still warm and hot, he blew away the green leaves and slowly took a sip. How should I start? I've done many evil things since I was young and I've never spoken the truth, but I truly do not like to recklessly kill the innocent. Chu Wanning unconsciously clenched his fist, the veins on the back of his pale hand bulged. Shizun, you see that path of martyrdom, right? I only wanted to add in those people that are inferior to animals in this world. In any case, that kind of person's death was not worth lamenting. But then I realized that it was so long that it would take 2 mortal worlds' corpses to fill it up. I don't feel too good about it either. I don't like the thought of having blood on my hands, so I've hardly ever killed anyone with my own hands. I didn't lie to you. You didn't lie to me. Chu Wanning suddenly said, I believe you never killed anyone with your own hands. Shi Mei raised his eyebrows as if he was surprised. Chu Wanning turned around, his eyes as cold as ice. You're kind, you're soft-hearted, you don't want to kill innocent people, you don't like to have blood on your hands. So you never do these things yourself. You created a Taxian Jun, you slaughtered the Rufeng sect by using a bloodthirsty tyrant. He does all the things you have to do, but he doesn't want to do them. You're quite brilliant. Shizun's words are a bit unfair. Shi Mei sighed, I never thought of killing the Rufeng sect. That was his personal grudge. There is no personal grudge or hatred that would make him commit such a monstrous sin. Without the 8 sufferings and everlasting hatred flower, would he not have committed such a heinous crime? Chu Wanning looked into Shi Mei's eyes, he wouldn't. Shi Mei only chuckled and waved his hand, indicating that he didn't want to pursue this matter any further. He said, forget it. It's useless to argue about this. The thing is, I once told Su Xuanglin that I hoped that this world would be able to stay alive, with mediocre people as slaves and where good and evil were rewarded accordingly. These are all truths. I am not lying. He paused for a moment and continued, but for the Butterfly-Boned Beauty Feast clan, giving kindness to others is equivalent to killing themselves. Our way back to our home has to be paved with blood. I have no choice. Chu Wanning closed his eyes. As Shi Mei spoke, he refilled his empty teacup and sighed, Shizun may not understand why I am able to sacrifice almost everyone's lives in 2 worlds for the sake of the Butterfly-Bone Beauty Feast clan's return to the demon realm. Actually, it's not that hard to understand. He looked at the rising steam. The room was very quiet. The only sounds that could be heard were that of Shi Mei and the voice from before. Has Shizun ever seen a herd of wild cows under siege? Eyes were red from killing intent, going on a rampage. They could not wait to pierce all the people and beasts in front of them with their 2 horns. This is the instinct of survival. Chu Wanning knew what he meant. The Butterfly-Boned Beauty Feast clan was like a group of beasts that had been forced into a desperate situation. Greedy faces surrounded them, ready to tear them apart. As far as the Butterfly-Boned Beauty Feast clan are concerned, there are only 2 options. Either be completely exterminated or return to the demon realm. This is a choice between life and death. As Shimei said this, his eyes dimmed a little. If the cultivation world hadn't treated the butterfly-boned beauty feast as business and wantonly humiliated them, if we were still able to survive in this world, no one would have done such a terrifying thing. He was silent for a while, his thoughts churning, his gaze gradually changing from gloomy to confused, from chaotic to cold and finally to crazy again. It was like the life he had lived up to this day. The cattle have no intention of killing. However, once the butcher's knife fell, his companions would lose their lives one by one. Shizun, how could you expect us to forgive this world? The cultivation world will not create a history book for the butterfly-boned beauty feast because to these people, we are nothing but livestock to be eaten or to be used for dual cultivation. However, our clan has always remembered that in the 11th year of the Human-Demon War, almost all of the pure-blood butterfly-boned beauty feast were killed. In the next few thousand years, even though we have to be extremely careful not to reveal our identities, we are still unable to escape the greed of these cultivators. 4,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 900 years ago, 700 years ago. The blood of a butterfly-boned beauty feast who had snuck into the midst of mortals was recovered, their flesh was eaten, their blood was drank and was assaulted then detained. They were exterminating our entire clan. Shimei's fingers gripped the teacup as veins began to appear on his wrist. Actually, if they really want to exterminate us, then it would have been better to finish us all at once. But how could those cultivators give up such a good cultivation formula? Chu Wanning. Shizun has read many books, so you should know what the sect leader of Gaiyuye did in order to prevent the butterfly-boned beauty feast from being completely exterminated. Shimei raised his eyes. A scarlet tinge could be seen in his peach blossom eyes. Chu Wanning was indeed aware of this matter. Every book that talked about Gaiyuye would mention about it, treating it as a glorious achievement. The medicine sect Gaiyuye made a project using 20 young butterfly-boned beauty feast and cultivators with strong and robust bodies and had them engage in sexual intercourse with the intent of producing a child. After the pregnancy, the sect leader used elixirs to induce labor, and within 4 months, the butterfly-boned beauty feast would be able to give birth to a baby. The woman who had just given birth would once again be forced to have sexual intercourse and continued to be forced to conceive, to give birth. This cycle ensured the survival of the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan. However, this method is like how pigs and sheep were raised to be slaughtered. No, not just like it. They were indeed the same as the pigs and the sheep. When a child was born, the male babies would immediately be refined into pills or directly sold to rich patrons like the Rufeng sect. Whereas the female babies would be kept in captivity and once they were of age, they would become a new breeding ground for mating. Chu Wanning could still remember the shock and disgust he felt the first time he saw this phrase appear in the Gaiyuye immortal pills. Shimei laughed and for the first time, his smile became somewhat miserable and repulsed. They used the method of refining the goo and apply it to the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan and actually got praises from the cultivation world. A living person. All alive. Just because they carry the blood of an ancient demon race which could bring benefits to their cultivation, they decided to treat the living people as livestock. In order to hide his pain, Shimei raised his hand to drink another cup of tea, but his fingers were trembling. The elixir that can stimulate the growth of an embryo is extremely damaging to the mother. None of the butterfly-boned beauty feast that were used as breeding ground lived past the age of 30. However, a short life is a good thing for them. They can quickly end their nightmare of the breeding cycle. When he said the words, there was a sharp pain in his face, as if he had been slapped in the face. For a moment, he couldn't help but want to curse out loud, but in the end, his mouth moved and only 2 words filled with ridicule came out. It's good. Chu Wanning opened his eyes and his gaze fell on Shimei. This man, who had always been either indifferent or unpredictable, was now like the most ordinary of avengers, his face carved with clear hatred. Shi Mei was silent for a while, as if he had thought of something and couldn't bear it any longer. He set the teacup down and rubbed his face in his palms. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked up, his eyes red. In Chu Wanning's memory, Shi Mei's emotions had never been so real and concrete. Shizun, do you still remember how Gai Yuye stopped their breeding program of butterfly-boned beauty feast? Chu Wanning did not know what he was feeling at the moment. He said hoarsely, a murder case had occurred. In the end, the butterfly-bone beauty feast was not a vile creature, and if the goo worms would still bite back, what more of living people? In the generation of Jiangxi's master, there was a young girl of the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan who was unwilling to give in and was extremely smart. Unlike the older sisters, she was neither suicidal nor numb to death. She used her beauty and sweet words to seduce a high-ranking disciple of the Tianyan Pavilion who came to see the goods at Gai Yuye. That disciple was also a lecherous person, so he couldn't help but fall into this beautiful woman's bed that night. The next day, she begged her lover to take her from Gai Yuye, making an oath that she would be under his control for her whole life and would help him with his cultivation. The Tianyan Pavilion disciple had a lustful look on his face as he agreed to her request. In the end, the girl escaped from his side within a few days, and he didn't know where she found the seed of fire. That butterfly-boned beauty feast returned to Linling Isle and burned Gai Yuye's side courtyard. That night, the butterfly-boned beauty feast that had been in captivity. All fled one after another with her help. Over 100 of Gai Yuye's disciples were burned to death by the fire. The other sects who came to watch the show felt their waists ache, and while they said some words of comfort, they secretly mocked Gai Yuye for being bested by a woman. Because of this, the reputation of the medicine sect plummeted. The sect leader was furious, so he ended the breeding program of butterfly-boned beauty feast clan. Since you want to laugh, then don't come ask for medicine in the future. In any case, there are so many of these people who had fled. If the various cultivators are capable, they might as well go hunting for themselves. Therefore, when Jiangxi became the sect leader, only Song Kaiyutong remained in Gai Yuye's hand. She had originally said that she would stay behind to serve the sect leader. However, Jiangxi was a person who did not want to get too close to women. He was especially annoyed with women and thought that they were nothing but disaster. Even though many of the elders in the sect were dissatisfied, he still decided to auction off this woman. Seeing that Chu Wanning was able to recall these memories, Shi Mei finally smiled and said, I want to admit to something. Go on. That day at Xianyuan Pavilion, yes, the day that Miss Song was sold. I went to. Chu Wanning was stunned. Shi Mei said, I went. I was in the first-tier seat and they were offering a price of 35 million. Listening to Shi Mei's words, Chu Wanning had a vague impression of who it was. He wanted to save her life when he saw that Song Kaiyutong was pitiable, but upstairs, there was a box with a screen covering it and the guests inside had bid 35 million. At that time, he had thought of asking Mo Ran to take the money to overturn this person's bid. It's you. It's me. Shi Mei's expression gradually calmed down. He smiled and said, I swore a long time ago that I would protect every butterfly-boned beauty feast that I can help. Song Kaiyutong is my clansman. I got the news and wanted to rescue her. Of course, in this lifetime, I also wanted to use Bulet and Gui to incite the killing intent within Mo Ran of that world. In the end, who knew that half of your soul was in his body and would protect him so well that it would even resonate with you? Forget it. All of this is in the past. What's more is there to say? Anyways, Shizun knew that it was Ye Wangzi who bought her in the end. Since she's one of your people, then why did you? Why did I stand aside and allow her to die? There's nothing I can do about it. I needed to conceal my bloodline. Actually, all the orders to Mount Huang were issued by me at that time. She was just a ruse. Under other circumstances, I might have been able to save her life. But in front of Su Xuanglin, Shizun also knows that my spiritual energy is weak and Su Xuanglin was my source of power at that time. He treats me as his best friend, but I befriended him as Shi Mingjing of Shi Shangpeak. If he knew that I am a butterfly-boned beauty feast, would he still be willing to conspire with me? I've already said this before, in the eyes of most cultivators, we are nothing but pigs, dogs, cows, sheep, and Su Xuanglin is no exception. Just look at his attitude towards Miss Song. Chu Wanning's mood was heavy, he didn't know what to say for a long time. On the other hand, Shi Mei wanted to speak more with him, so he continued, let's get back to what we were discussing before. About the butterfly-boned beauty feast that escaped from Gai Yuye. Chu Wanning lowered his eyes and remained silent. After a while, he looked at Shi Mei's beautiful face. He had actually noticed something when he was narrating and he almost sighed as he said, that girl, she was your mother. Shi Mei stared blankly at first, but then his spine relaxed and his facial features softened. He smiled wryly at last. You've guessed correctly. That's right, she was my mother. End chapter.